Oh no, the Gilead remdesivir drug seems to have had a bad clinical result, and more evidence that hydroxychloroquine works, as well as a plan forward. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Martenson. I'm here with your SARS-CoV-2 daily update, a.k.a. the honey badger virus. Why the honey badger? Because it can escape from almost any enclosure you put it into. And if it gets in your body, it's got really sharp claws. And so it's just something I call it, just to help keep a little levity on it, because it's such a serious thing that's been going on here. Today is April 23rd, 2020. We're on day 91. Calling this a plan forward, but first, the numbers. These are April 22nd cases. Today is April 23rd. Why are we doing the day before? So we have complete reporting. Here in the United States, almost at 30,000 cases yesterday. By the way, it has had 11 days in the past month where it's been over 30,000 cases, so it's down a tiny bit, but not really all that much. So we're still on track to bust that million cases by, I guess it looks like just another 9 days from now. And approaching 50,000 deaths. That's going to be coming up maybe tomorrow at this pace with 2,300 deaths. And when we look all the way down at the bottom here at Sweden, why Sweden? I don't want to pick on Sweden. Of course, Martenson is a Swedish name. That's where my grandfather hailed from. Came over in a boat in 1918 at Ellis Island. I'm mentioning Sweden because a lot of people keep pointing out that maybe Sweden is the way forward and that Sweden didn't go through an extensive lockdown, meaning they didn't damage their economy nearly as much as other places, and yet they have about the same results as other places. So that would seem, well, let's be like Sweden, meaning let's just open our economy up because apparently we didn't need to shut it down. However, I need to point out Sweden has very different cultural practices in place before COVID came along, where they already know how to practice social distancing. That's a normal part of their culture as well. If you have a child who is sick, it is fully expected you will stay home with that child. You will not send that child to school sick. That would be a big cultural no-no. So Sweden already has cultural practices in place about not infecting other people. It's there. So for them to not do a lockdown as well as to follow the government edicts for a little bit more social distancing, having the elderly and other vulnerable not be out in public and to be isolated and have people bringing them food and medicine and things like that. That was already baked into their culture. And so they were able to do things that I think other cultures can't really do as easily. All right, looking across here, total new cases across the world, still flatline. But one of the things you see here is like there's these little moments and it goes down and then it goes up again, then it goes down and then it goes up again, then it goes down again, then it goes up again. So we're seeing that same cadence in the United States, and somebody on Twitter, I was going to say YouTube, but on Twitter, posted this chart, and it had a lot of explanatory power. So I've helpfully marked Saturday and Sunday on this particular chart. And I think you'll notice a pattern here where Saturday's in green and Sunday. So Saturday is also a little higher than Sunday. Apparently a few more people work on Saturday than Sunday. But I think it's pretty easy to detect the overall pattern here. So a lot of what we're seeing in the results is about the cases bouncing up and down. It has a lot to do with work patterns and work habits. And so this is just for the United States, but we do see a very clear pronounced drop-off in tests every single weekend. So I think that helps to explain things. Looking now at the UK, all weekly all-cause deaths. Thank you, Allison, for sending this along by email. This is weekly observed and expected number of all-cause deaths. So observed versus expected, all ages. And here they're noting as well when were the dominant flus circulating. So the H3N2s, they had some runs at that. They also had H1N1 and H3N2. And those create these little bumps right here. So flu is absolutely a seasonal rhythmic killer in the UK. And but here's where they are. And if we look at this number here and we said, I'll just round off, we'll call that 13,000, even though I know 13,000 is a little bit higher than this. But if we said from 13 to 20, that's like 7,000 additional weekly deaths from all causes. And remember, some deaths are being suppressed because people are staying at home, and other deaths are being enhanced by having COVID. So this really settles the dying of versus dying with COVID. These are additional deaths beyond what you would expect from all causes. So I think you can pretty well attribute everything in this amount up here is due to the effect of COVID. And that includes, of course, again, some suppressive effects as well as what COVID is doing in terms of enhancing deaths. And they balance out to this, which is 7,000 additional deaths per week in the UK. So we're starting to see that, yes, this is a very serious illness. No, it's not just like the flu, all those things. All right. I want to point out as well, I got some, again, through Twitter. This was sent to me. Thank you very much. The Brazil hydroxychloroquine results. This is empirical treatment with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin for suspected cases of COVID, followed up by telemedicine. Suspected is really an important word in this case because here's the deal. Here's what they're doing in this particular study. They're saying, look, people are presenting. We don't have time or even the test kit resources to be able to run it to know for sure, do these people have COVID or not? In the absence of that information, if they're presenting with fever, shortness of breath, things like that, we can say, look, it's probable. So we're going to treat people with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. All right. I don't see zinc in this one either, but again, I'd love to see zinc. But now, at least they're doing this and they're doing it early. And so guess what's going to happen here? Some people in these groups aren't actually going to have COVID, and many of them will. So this is going to be a little bit contaminated by the results are going to be contaminated by that lack of COVID in some of the people. But still, what did they find? Well, very startling results here. So they had 636 symptomatic outpatients, 400, and they gave them. They said, "Hey, listen, do you want to be part of this trial? Here's what we're going to do. Here are the risks." 412 of those people signed up for that and said, "Yeah, give me some of that." 224 refused medications, and they were part of the control group. So what they found was the need for hospitalization was 1.9% in the treatment group and 5.4% in the control group. So 2.8 times greater. That's a really big difference right there. Okay. That one right there. And in particular, check this out. In those who started the treatment before versus after the 7th day of symptoms, the need for hospitalization was 1.17 versus 3.2%. So before and after. So this separates even people who are within the HCQ plus AZ groups and separates within that group. So we have two findings here. First, with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin at any point in time, whether it was within 7 days or after 7 days of symptom onset, we saw this 2.8 times greater number of people who weren't treated ending up in hospitals, needing hospitalization. But even within the AZ HCQ group, we find that those who started treatment before versus after the 7th day of symptoms, the need for hospitalization was half. Okay, roughly half. All right, conclusion. This stuff works. P-value, very highly significant finding here. P-value of 0.001. So that's less than a 1 in 1,000 chance that this was just an accidental finding. So very significant. And this is a really positive finding for hydroxychloroquine. What don't we have here? We don't have a randomized trial. What don't we have here? We don't have zinc in here. But still, this is a pretty good result right here, and glad to see this kind of data coming out. In other news, we got news today of a remdesivir failure. This is the Gilead treatment that's there's all this excitement around that seemed to be overshadowing the hydroxychloroquine. Why? I don't know. Maybe because this costs $1,000 a dose versus a buck for the hydroxychloroquine. At any rate, we don't have the data on this yet. So let me, again, giant salt shaker, cube of salt on this one. So maybe when the data comes out and we get to see it, we're going to find a very different result. I'm just telling you what the headlines say. And again, the headlines could be very wrong because they often are, right? We know that. Data on Gilead's remdesivir show no benefit for coronavirus patients. What happened was somehow this is early data that leaked out. I think the story I heard was somehow the data accidentally got put up on a WHO website. Somebody grabbed it, reported about on it. Here it is. But we haven't seen the actual data yet from this study. We don't even know anything about it. But that's an early report right there. So let me go ahead and I should have done this. Let's question this. Let's keep an open mind on this for now. All right. I want to shift gears just a little bit. This comes up a lot, and I want to talk about up-down versus left-right. So the whole left-right axis here is not one that I engage with very much or very often. I don't think there's a lot of benefit. I don't do it. And people on the left get mad at me because I'm not on their side, on their team, and people on the right get mad at me because I'm not on their team. And honestly, if I get backed into a corner, I put a pox on both houses right now. and I've got a lot of data to back that up. I don't care if somebody is left or if they're right. I do care that if they have opinions and that they can back those up, and that you don't just scratch at their opinions and hit primer right away and find out their opinion came from a New York Times article on this side or a Fox News thing on this side. I want to know how you think, how you got to that conclusion. And I'm very agnostic. I think there's great things on both sides of the aisle. I think there's a lot of junk on both sides of the aisle. So how do I fall? I tend to fall into an up-down, which I call integrity. Integrity is the up in this story to me. I like the word integrity a lot. It means a lot of things. So something that has integrity, has strength, good results from solid studies have integrity. Individuals can have integrity. But I think the best definition that I've heard of integrity came to me from a good friend of mine, Peter, who said, integrity means being willing to be completely re-educated at any moment in time. I like that. Because what that means to me is that if you have that sort of integrity, you are so solid, you are so certain in yourself that you can be exposed to new information that completely upends everything you thought you knew. And you can be re-educated right in that moment because that's how solid you are. That new orientation of new information won't upset your apple cart. Well, what would be on the other end of integrity down here? I thought about this for a while. I'm not sure. I don't know what's the opposite of that. It's not lack of integrity. Is it despair? It could be. But I think I settled on this, chaos. And I think this works for the benefit of our particular conversation because I'm seeing a lot of chaos out there right now. Jumbled thinking, unfactual stuff that's being presented, really sloppy thinking. Bad studies, bad science, all this stuff, the politicization of science is really driving me nuts because what we need more than ever right now, obviously, is we need to have integrity in our leadership. We need to have institutional integrity. We need to have integrity of a plan forward. And it just feels like chaos right now, and it's just in the United States, speaking for my own country, the bailout plan was just pure chaos. And it was these two sides got together and next thing you knew, you can't defend the way they put this thing forward except to say, well, it wasn't as bad as it might have been. You have to accept a lot of waste when a program billions are rolled out. But the way it got rolled out and how the little people got shafted and how the big corporations managed to sidle up and suck at that teat and get most of the money is just gross, right? It's just chaotic and it's not going to help. So this is my personal axis that I operate on. And there are people of integrity on both sides of the aisle. And there are people who are just chaotic and, unpleasant to me on both sides of the aisle. So left-right isn't useful to me. Can you defend what you think? Are you thoughtful? Do you have a lot of opinions and facts that can be backed up with good, solid data? And are you willing to change your thinking when you're presented with new facts and new data? If so, then you have integrity and we'll get along great. And by the way, over at Peak Prosperity, Adam Taggart and I have collected an extraordinary tribe of people who've been gathering around this very set of ideas that we want to be curious, we want to be open-minded, we want to wrestle with things. We're going to expose ourselves to all different kinds of thinking with the intention that we're going to wrestle with it and we're going to think it through and we're going to come to our own conclusions around it. So that's what I value most at Peak Prosperity is the tribe of people who have assembled over there because we get to have conversations that are a lot like the ones we're having here, except this is a one-way conversation where I'm presenting a lot of information to you in an organized, structured way. And I'm ready, willing, and able to change it at a moment's notice if we get different sorts of information. So I just wanted to get that out of the way right now because, again, please, and please just stop anybody who's clacking away right now trying to say, if I could just convince you that Obama is bad or Obama was awful or Biden is good or Biden is awful or Trump is good or Trump is awful or any of that stuff, just stop. I don't care. What I care about is how we're going to get out of the mess that we're currently in and what is the path forward and where is the nation going? Where is the world going? That's what I care about most right now. So in the spirit of that, I think the plans out there, and I put quotes around it because I think that's just like plans. It's just not how they aren't really plans. They don't. I'll take the quotes away when I see a solid plan. So here's plan A. Keep everyone locked at home until a vaccine arrives or something. I think that's the plan. I don't really know what the plan is. I think that's the plan. Remember, I am very sympathetic to this idea that there are three things that we're needing to balance against each other. And let me repeat this because some people seem to have forgotten this. They think that somehow I'm all about just nobody ever getting infected or dying. And that's not at all where I'm at. I'm number two, really important to me, because if we don't keep this economy going, it could be as bad an outcome or worse than what happens if the infection comes and swamps our hospitals, or if we don't manage to control this particular infection in some important way, right? So these three things have to be balanced against each other. Stop the pandemic, keep the economy going, keep the hospital system working, and I get that. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? And again, I don't think you can just default to plan B, which is sort of circulating now, which is, well, let's just reopen everything. Well, it's been too painful for too long. We can't, let's just reopen everything. Too unsophisticated, because if you just reopen everything, trust me, this is going to come roaring out again right here, right? And but we can't just keep everybody locked at home till a vaccine arrives, because the economy will be so dead by then. We'll lose 10 times as many people or more to the effects of that than we would from the virus itself. So what do we do? And thank you, Hank. Got this today on Twitter. Hank said, okay, Chris, yeah, we know it didn't have to be this way. And should we just accept that and try to get the machine going? Well, that's probably not enough to prevent the destruction of the economy. What is the answer to 4 people on a train track? I know already. Plant a garden. All right, Hank, in the spirit of that, let's talk this through, okay? And before we get there, I want to acknowledge that this is really a trying time, that tempers are getting short and flaring, that a lot of people are starting to have a very emotional reaction to all of this, and that's normal and expected. And in fact, we talked about this a while ago. And one of the things we talk about at Peak Prosperity is the 6 stages of awareness, that when, let's talk about the 6 stages of awareness around this particular virus, right? First is denial. Hey, it's just the flu, bro, right? And all that is just the flu. It's just the flu. Anger, and I said it's the flu. Stop telling me about this. You're wrong. There's all this shouting going on. But then people get into the bargaining. Well, I'm taking extra vitamin C. Maybe this will all be fine. Hey, I heard that there's a vaccine coming. Maybe that'll be along soon. Maybe this remdesivir works. Maybe it's hydroxychloroquine. We're, all this hoping that something's going to come along and just sort of fix it. Once, after the remdesivir failure, I'm sure a lot of people slipped straight back down into number 4 here, fear or anxiety, which is like, everything's going to collapse, get toilet paper. This is a very ordinary stage that people go into. And I think where Hank was starting to express is this step 5, which is, what are we going to do? There just doesn't seem any way through this. But he also was pointing to stage 6 here, which is, okay, it is what it is. Let's do our best. Let's help each other. What can we do? In the spirit of that, I'm going to take a stab at this. Is a place, not because I have the answer, but because I want to get the conversation started about, all right, it's here, it's not going away. What are we going to do about that? Besides plant a garden, which you should do, by the way. I'll get to that in a second. But remember, okay, this is the gold pandemic sort of approach. And if I were in charge, what would I do? First, I'd do all of this, right? And in particular, this is critical. You need to have clear, consistent, transparent, frequent, and timely communication. You got to be really good on this, okay? That's really important. And a lot of times you're going to have to move rapidly and without perfect information. That's going to be really critical here. And so that's what I've been doing. That's why I was able to come out with stuff in early, January 23rd and 24th was, listen, if you have the data, you got to do what you can do with it, right? And you're going to have to move kind of rapidly without it. But this is it. We're going to do all this stuff, okay? So let's imagine we're doing all of this. That's great. But, we're still quarantining people and we're doing all of that. How are we going to get the economy moving again? How do we open all of this up just a little bit more? Well, let's start here. The first thing I would like to do, and let me see. So let's imagine down here, step 4, treat and collect the data and share it. All right, here's what I would do on step 4. This is if I were in charge, right? I got my magic wand. I'm waving it around. Here it is. Ready? Tens of billions of dollars for clinical trials. Not for the banks, not for $700 million for a big hospital system out in Colorado, none of that stuff. I'd direct tens of billions of dollars for clinical trials, and I would redirect the FDA and the CDC to be the massive data collectors for every clinical trial. They would be pulling all of this in, right? All the data. They would just be the data vacuums. It shouldn't be up to individual hospitals. It shouldn't be up to individual research centers to have to fund all this stuff. It shouldn't be up to doctors and nurses to have to collect data and share it in chat rooms, which is what they're doing right now, right? So immediately redirect. I would want fast, nimble teams at the FDA and the CDC to come in and just start, or your relative, if this was a different country, your respective agencies for that. Become massive data collectors, and you share it freely with everybody. And then you test everything. Chinese herbs, hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, every antiviral known, plasma therapy, where we're taking those antibodies in people's plasma and using that, monoclonal antibodies, especially the ones that are stopping the IL-6 cytokine storm cascade. I'm not speaking well. Everything. Just test it all. If your Aunt Sally has a remedy that works, let's try it. And we're just going to try all this stuff and we're going to do it in a rational, logical, scientific way, randomized, placebo-controlled trials whenever possible, right? And then we're going to collect this massive amounts of data, just huge amounts, anonymize it so that, people's privacy to the extent necessary is protected. Then make it public. Here's the genius. You make it public and you announce a huge prize for anybody that can crack the code, right? So all these genius programmers, the AI people at Amazon who figured out how to, present the next thing that I want to buy. And they're pretty right kind of often. They got me sort of solved. I get that. The X Prize was Peter Diamandis and some others. They said, listen, why does NASA have a lock on space travel? So they announced a $10 million prize for anybody, private organization, company, individual that could crack getting out into space. They had certain parameters about that around, how high it had to go, how long it had to circulate there, because they wanted to see if it's possible. And that $10 million prize unlocked $100 million of effort, right? And guess what? Now we have private space travel. And guess what? Before this X Prize came along, everybody thought it has to be NASA. Afterwards, it's like, well, no, not NASA. Maybe we've got all these private companies that can get out into space better, cheaper, faster, all of that. That's what incentives do. Remember, Charlie Munger, you show me the outcome and I will show you the incentive. Or you can reverse that. Show me the incentive. I'll show you the outcome. Both ways works. At any rate, let's incentivize. Let's incentivize a huge prize, $10 billion. I'm holding my pinky up, shaking it next to the side of my mouth, right? And then from that, whenever we find somebody who cracks the code and finds out, oh my gosh, this pattern seems to, be the best combo, then refine it, iterate through those treatments. Just come right back up, keep going through these clinical trials. All right. Very soon, I think we would end up with a best solution. We would hone in on it very quickly. Great. All right. Part 3 of all of this for me then, what would I do? Well, if I was in the leadership position, I'd help people with their adjustment reactions. Remember, I talked about this this premiered on March 12th. And the title of this one was How to Inform Your Friends and Family Without Creating Pushback. In there, we talked about these adjustment reactions, the teachable moment in crisis communication, this genius work by Peter Sandman. If you haven't seen that, here's the link for that, or you could just Google it and find it. I would highly recommend watching it. It starts almost exactly at the 12-minute mark. The front end of this is, a bunch of current data, which is now uncurrent. So check that out. This is really important if you haven't watched it, or maybe even watch it again, because the adjustment reaction is a really critical moment in every crisis. People have to go through it individually, and a nation has to go through it. So when I say help people with their adjustment reactions, a good leader would speak to it directly, would say, listen, we are all going to have moments of panic, of freaking out, of anxiety, and that this is perfectly normal. And we're not here to tell you not to have those moments. We're here to tell you to have them because they're normal. And once you move through them, you will then be ready to move into one of those later stages. If you are back here in one of these earlier emotional places, don't try and deny these and say, I won't go through any of these. I'll just jump straight to acceptance. That's not how you're wired. It's not how humans are wired. So the first thing I would want to do is I would want to have a leader talk to people about our national, our global, our individual adjustment reactions and lead by example with that. And Take people through personal actions, tell them exactly what they can do so that they can begin to minimize their own personal anxiety around the world, and so they can begin to really move forward in a constructive way, right? So these are all our endorsed personal actions, and they ought to be enshrined at the national level. And many of these, when people say, let's be like Sweden, well, guess what? Sweden already does these things. They stay the fuck home. They never go out if they're sick. They practice excellent personal hygiene, right? They have their home as a green zone. They're helping others. The weak, the old, the sick, the people who are compromised. They already have a plan for that stuff, right? All right. So I would take people through that. And the second thing is I would prioritize financial aid to those on the bottom, not on the top, right? Because even if you give all the money to the people at the bottom, it ends up at the top anyway. That whole trickle-down thing is a bunch of junk, right? That never works, right? But if you give money to the people at the bottom, it ends up at the top pretty darn quick, like almost by the next day usually anyway, right? They pay their mortgages, pay off the car loans, all that stuff, whatever. So when thinking this through, oh my God, it's just like in the United States, maybe your country's doing it better, but my country, we're just failing at this so badly. Like, check this out. This just came out on April 22nd. This came out on NPR. I saw this in the print edition. The Small Business Rescue earned banks. 10 billion in fees. Let me put quotes around that earned. You know what they earned for that? Risk-free money. The banks pocketed $10 billion in fees for just being loan processors. No risk. That's disgusting. Oh my God. Right? And how about this? Breaking. This came out today here on April 23rd. The U.S., the Treasury Department, issued new guidance for small business loans to make it harder, not impossible, for public companies, that's the big ones, to get funds. I wrote a day late and $320 billion short. How were small business loans not targeted to small businesses? How was it possible that banks raked $10 billion in fees out of that program? How was it that Disney took in vast gobs of money around this stuff and other major companies that frankly didn't need it? And how was it that nobody foresaw that at the, official levels, allegedly? Of course they foresaw it. That was part of the program. At any rate, what would I do? I would prioritize financial aid to those on the bottom, not the top. That would be essential. That might get us somewhere. Next, you got to lead by example. You absolutely have to lead by example on this stuff. No more press conferences where everybody in the administration is standing 3 feet apart from each other with their hands folded primly in the front, but nobody's wearing a mask. No social distancing, no mask. You want to see how it's done? Here. This is Costa Rica on March 18th. They're at a video conference held between the health authorities of Costa Rica and China. Here they're discussing hydroxychloroquine, other treatment methods, things like that. Oh, let's look. Everybody has a mask on. If everybody has a mask on, you can relax the social distancing a little bit. But as well, this is the leadership of Costa Rica. And guess what? They're leading by example. This is critical. You have to lead by example. Values are modeled. They're never taught. You can't teach your kids values. You model them. You can't expect your kids to demonstrate values that you yourself are not actually modeling, right? And that goes true at every level of society. All right. Then after that, you got to paint a vision of the new future. This is essential. Leadership needs to be doing this. They should be asking and answering this question, where are these questions? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? That is, what's the vision and what are our resources? I learned all of this stuff from Mr. Douglas, who was just one of the best mentors I've had, who very, very smart gentleman who worked with myself when I was back in business, and I was working with him, actually, I should put it that way, around developing strategies and how you would implement a strategy in a company. And every strategy has 2 parts, right? A strategy has a vision, and it answers the question, how are you going to get there? Visions are easy to come by. We're going to the stars. That's easy. The hard part is, well, do you have the resources to do that? Guess what? You never have all the resources you want. So a good leader will paint a vision of a new future that's accessible. People can imagine themselves in that role. They can see themselves in that new future. So it's tangible, right? And then you paint that vision, but then that has to be married to a credible plan of what are the resources. How are we going to get there? So a lot of my work in the world has been about of late, the last 10 years, noting that we have finite resources. We have a finite amount of oil. I'm not against using it necessarily, but I'm kind of against wasting it or squandering it if it means that at the end of using that energy, which is our resource, that's the how we get there part. If at the end of that process, we're not in a place we want to be, which is that new future. Well, what does that look like? Paint the vision of that new future. Are we all living in net zero houses and we're able to walk, live, work, play near each, in a geographically relevant area? All of that stuff. That's what I've been focused on for a long time. And what's bothered me is there hasn't been a strategy at the national level in the United States. There just hasn't been one. Not a credible one, not one that made sense. No market forces aren't going to get you all the way there, blah, blah, blah. So that's what I would do if I were in charge through all of this stuff. And again, just to reiterate here, you got to do all of this stuff, all of this, right? I won't take you through every bit of it. You can read it as well as I can, but this is necessary as well. You gotta get all the data out there. You gotta help people with their adjustment reactions. You gotta model that for them and let them know it's okay. And, give some really quality endorsed personal actions, also some national actions that make sense, right? You got to prioritize the financial aid to those on the bottom, not the top. That's going to be really critical. And if we want to avoid some really bad social breakdowns, I'm worried about that now, got to be honest. And as well, you got to lead by example. That's necessary. And with all of that, it's all meaningless if you can't paint a vision of a new future, because guess what? Everything has changed. Everything. We're not going back to how things used to be. That's just not going to happen. Okay. All right. Now I just want to have a little bit of fun. This is my Bruised Egos edition, not mine. I'm talking about the mainstream press. I was a little harsh on the mainstream press, and deservedly so. I called them criminally silent way back here on January 27th. And if you were watching those early videos, I would be trolling through, basic news feeds, the ones that you would find on Yahoo, on Bing, on Google, front page of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all of that. And none of them were talking about the pandemic. And then later, a few weeks later, when they finally started talking about it, it was like, no worse than the flu, bro, right? All that stuff. So I was like pretty harsh on the media. So guess what? There was a little backlash. The first, there were several that lashed out, but this one kind of stuck with me, and there's a reason I'm bringing this one up again. So these Bruised Egos didn't take long here on February 1st. This is in Mother Jones. Allie here, who has not retracted or apologized in any way for this really bad reporting here, but he's young, so maybe he'll figure it out. Said here, video creators are cranking out content that in many cases spreads alarm, unsubstantiated claims, scams, and sometimes outright disinformation. And a lot of them are trying to make money off it. Oh, no, people are trying to make money. Well, why did you write this article, Allie? Was it for a paycheck, possibly? It's interesting. I wonder about that. One popular series on the virus is produced by a personal finance guru, which I'm not. I'm not a personal finance guru. I'm not a guru of any sort, but it's not even personal finance. It's actually never what I've been about. The reason this is funny for me is that Allie actually spent a bunch of time on the phone with Adam Taggart, my co-partner over at Peak Prosperity, and Adam set him straight, gave him all kinds of information, didn't use any of it, decided to tag me as a personal finance guru with a history. Uh-oh. You don't like people with histories, do you? Oh, he has a history. He's a great guy, but he has a history of pushing economic theories about peak oil and other resource crunches, but who has recently rebranded as a pandemic expert as new coverage of the virus has exploded. Actually, Allie, you knew this. I actually have a PhD in pathology from Duke, so it actually wasn't a hard switch for me at all. Anyway, so I get named. And so why am I bringing all this up again? Well, by the way, fun fact, Mother Jones, here's how they bill themselves, right on this same page. At the bottom of this article here, they say, Mother Jones was founded as a nonprofit in 1976 because we knew corporations and the wealthy wouldn't fund the type of hard-hitting journalism we set out to do. Well, Mother Jones, looks like you strayed a little bit from the old mission statement. You might want to do a fact check on your fact there and see if it still aligns with your current reality. And at any rate, I talked about shooting the messenger here on February 5th. Now, why am I raising all this? Well, here's why. This is kind of interesting. So good news, bad news, good news. I finally got mentioned in the New York Times. Bad news, it was in this story by Dion Searcy here. Check this out. Early this year, Ms. Francis, which is, by the way, it's about a Jehovah's Witness. The story is all keyed around a hard-hitting piece about a Jehovah's Witness who's having trouble knocking on doors because guess what? Nobody wants to answer their door. But at any rate, Ms. Francis, Jehovah's Witness, had been seeing reports on Facebook about the virus sweeping through Wuhan, China. The host of a show she watched on YouTube, Peak Prosperity, had been warning the outbreak could spread internationally. Check this out. This Chris Martenson, a finance guru turned pandemic early warner. That's a funny way to characterize me, isn't it? Well, when I clicked on this link, it brought me back to this article. So Dione decided that was somehow. So this is why I bring this back up again, because there's this one bad article, and then people are like, oh, let it go, and I did let it go. I haven't been beating on poor Allie too hard, over the time, but at any rate, it's out there, and so when a lazy journalist comes along and wants to begin characterizing this, they just click on this. Did I get any calls from the New York Times asking for clarification? None of that stuff. Was there any sort of fact-checking to find out if this warnings and, financial guru, there it is again, turned pandemic. This is how this stuff gets sort of taken. So, and pushed through in the media. So I am now a financial guru turned pandemic early warner. Oh my God. That's what we're up against here. Sloppy journalism with an axe to grind. And I think it's just, honestly, I did this to myself. I shouldn't have called the mainstream press criminally silent, which was true. And I still hold to that. But if I wanted to get on the good side of the New York Times, I wouldn't do what I'm about to do, which is look up Dione's earlier article here. So let's see what what article did she write right before this one? Oh, April 17th, a few days ago. Temperature checks at the shoe store? ? Social distancing while browsing for handbags? ? Okay. All right. I see what we're up against here. All right, Dione, if you ever want to set the record straight and you actually want a great article about how this all transpired, I think there's actually a ridiculously good story about how, to requote here, citizen journalism, can actually do some actually good reporting. And I'd be willing to set my weapons down if you'll set yours down, and maybe we could find out if there's a good story to be told here, because there is one. There's a really good story. All right, remember, you got to resubscribe to this channel because I keep annoying certain outfits out there, including YouTube, including Twitter, apparently, I guess. I don't know. But for whatever reason, people do get unsubscribed from this channel very helpfully all the time. I'm going to keep reiterating this, and there's actually this is a meta conclusion here. Plant a Garden is a little bit about the fact that I think that gardening is a wonderful pastime for people, especially if you're locked down or otherwise at home, especially if you don't have something else to do. You're elderly, you're immunocompromised, but you're otherwise not going to reinsert yourself in society for a while. This is a very helpful thing to do, but I'm a little worried about the direction things are going because the plans that I've put forward and the plans that I see being put forward are very much at odds with one another, and I'm a little worried things are going to get maybe a little rockier before they get better in this story, just because, well, we're being knuckleheads at this stage. We're not being super smart about it. So having a garden might be a good thing. Conclusions for today. Hey, we got more evidence that HCQ Plus works. That's out of Brazil. Looked like a reasonable study. Could it have been better? Yep, but it's a lot better than the other ones I've seen so far, especially the one yesterday that was that meta study that was collected study that was done out of UVA about the VA patients. That one was junk. A leaked report now that remdesivir maybe is disappointing. That's not good news. Left versus right really isn't important right now. And if it's important to you, it's just not important to me. And as well, it's really not all that important to the people who come to Peak Prosperity and are part of that tribe right there. In fact, we very often are surprised by each other when people actually do drag politics out. We kind of shut those conversations down pretty quick because they're not helpful. And people often discover after spending years being friends and intellectual allies and really parsing through stuff that they share disappointing gaps in their politics, and that's fine. It's actually kind of shocking and wonderful to find out that people can communicate and that left versus right isn't important when what we really care about is understanding what's happening and how we're going to get through it. And there is a way through this, but oh man, it's going to involve being in our highest integrity. We're going to have to bring our very best game to this. Science and logic really needs to lead the way here. And we have to make lots of room for people's very usual, very ordinary, very human adjustment reactions. These are really hard times. They're not just hard financially or physically, but really emotionally. A lot of what we thought was true about the world has been exposed to be false. We just discovered that corporations don't care about human life. We just discovered that universities don't care about actually educating their students as much as they care about taking money. We just discovered that our very basic institutions, everything that they claim to stand for has been exposed to be kind of false. And that's hard. That's really hard. So I think we need to have leadership that involves both the head and the heart. It's a balance of both of these two things. We're going to be as logical and as rational and scientific as we can, and we're going to understand that this is an emotional process that we all need to get through together, and that the better we can combine head and heart, making room for both without one dominating over the other, that balance is going to give us the integrity we need to really get through this. And by getting through this, I mean get through it and come out the other side in better shape than we entered it. And that's my hope and my vision for this. And we can get there. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
Hi, folks. Adam Taggart, co-founder of Peak Prosperity, here with good news. In his daily videos, Chris often refers to the book that he and I wrote, Prosper: How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting. It presents a practical model for living with greater resilience, and those who read it and followed its advice were much better prepared for the coronavirus outbreak than the average household. Given its heightened relevance to the turbulent times we now find ourselves in, Chris and I want everyone to benefit from this book's formula for better, more secure living. So we're giving the book to you for free. To get your copy, simply visit peakprosperity.com/freebook. We think you'll find this an extremely valuable and inspiring resource for the current COVID-19 outbreak and for being well positioned for any kind of crisis that comes our way in the future. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.